I am Ted Chavone with Chavone Robertson Associates, 222 North 7th Street, Grand Junction, Colorado. We are the project representatives for the Magnus annexation, overall development plan, and plan development zoning. I want to thank Scott for his presentation. I will restate our objectives and requests for approvals as briefly as possible, somewhat in the order Scott presented them. This is what we call the existing context slide. There are 4 properties that make up the project area. 2 are annexed, 2 are seeking annexation. Scott addressed everything else about these properties. All 4 properties are combined into one outline development plan, which we are seeking to be approved with a PD zone. This document, modified accordingly, will govern this development. This illustrative is a little easier to look at in terms of the single access off of 22 1/4 road, which is divided by a median for both fire access and aesthetics and realigned to meet city code and fire safety. The blue area depicts the current alignment of Magnus Court. 72 of the 74 lots are clustered on the flatter areas of the site, along with 2 on 22 1/4 road. The slope analysis for these lots is discussed below. There is a significant amount of dedicated open space, over 64% of the site, very little of which is disturbed during construction. There are limited areas of proposed HOA open space within the area of the homes, but the majority is for public use and enjoyment. Scott touched into some of the traffic numbers, which I have left to our traffic engineer, Carrie McDowell, to address, as there were some previous misspoken numbers and recent evaluations that have resulted in an addendum to the original traffic study. Carrie has provided a PowerPoint on the addendum and is available for questions and answers, but will not be presenting tonight. I want to point out that the graphic on the screen is the current circulation plan for the city of Grand Junction. The areas addressing future road classifications are predominantly in the city. At present, part of Magnus and most of the neighborhoods to the north are predominantly in the county, and Broadway is a state highway. All of this plays into challenges this developer has been tackling. In addressing the access safety issues that were of concern at the first Planning Commission hearing, I note that the entire Magnus team took the access concerns expressed by neighbors and the Planning Commission and drilled into them from a number of angles, looking for practical solutions. To do so, we spent time on site during high volume traffic and considered a couple of options. We first met with the county. This was administration, public works, engineering, and planning to discuss their interest and potential participation. I want to note that the county said, "We wish this project could stay in the county because we see it as a good project," along with the comment, "If it were to stay in the county, we would find the existing roads to meet our standards both currently and with the addition of the Magnus project." The county also made us aware of an existing study addressing walking and biking routes to Broadway Elementary School that does not support a lot of route investment south of Broadway. These pages from the study indicate that there is not a safe crossing of Broadway, and went on to indicate that Mesa County, the City of Grand Junction, and CDOT are the responsible parties to address this. The study also provided a summary color-coded similar to a stoplight, with red as least favored, yellow as not favored, blue as favored, and green as most favored. That coloring of those routes is depicted on this path ratings exhibit. Note the existing road network on the north side of Broadway, which has its shortcomings, but a significant existing road network within the existing neighborhoods. Also note the lack of blue, which was favored, and green, most favored, on the south side. However, it was at this first meeting with the county where both they and the developer agreed to put money towards some sort of pedestrian improvement. In summary, addressing the crossing of Broadway is a priority for safety for the neighborhoods south of Broadway, and it has the highest likelihood of garnering support from multiple jurisdictions, which we address in more detail shortly. But additionally, at this first meeting with the county, they also noted that they were starting studies on some drainage problems in the adjacent areas to the Magnus development, and that the presence of Magnus would help alleviate some of these problems. This first exhibit shows how the ridgeline through the Magnus project forms the top of a watershed that sheet drains to the northeast and concentrates into drainages. The second slide, which shows the red ridgeline that goes through the project, depicts how the road network within Magnus intercepts drainage between the ridgeline and the north boundary of the project, collects it, and manages its release. It essentially removes this volume of water from going into those neighborhoods to the north. Returning from the county with additional information and support, we next met with the city, the Public Works Department, Planning Director, Development Engineer, and Senior Planner to discuss their interest and participation in helping mitigate access issues in the county neighborhoods north of Magnus. I must note that the city, like the county, saw no safety issues with the existing roads, noting that they are designed for the 1,080 traffic level. The city was also clear that the neighborhood roads remain county roads and there was no funding for road projects outside of the city. With the exception of the off-site turn lanes, which will be constructed with projected Magnus TCP fees, the city was financially handcuffed. So, out of the meetings and studies noted above, a new option was developed, and this was with significant aid from community development. And the city facilitated a meeting between Mesa County, the city of Grand Junction, and the developer. All three were on board for participating and for having a meeting with CDOT to garner their participation as a fourth funding entity for the Broadway Trail. Short story made shorter, at the meeting with CDOT, they said no. And after a long pause of silence, Trent Prawl said, and then there were three. And this is where it stands today. You have three entities who are willing to work together to make something of need and substance work along Broadway. Tangential to the above is the timing of improvements. We do not see a building permit being pulled for many months. Adding to that the time it takes to construct a home, it will be between a year and a half before the obligation for a turn lane, relocated pedestrian crossing on Broadway, and some length of additional Broadway trail will be started. Back to trails and open space. As stated earlier, the idea of 64% open space on this project has not changed. If this project is approved, we will move forward on discussions with the museum, the city, or possibly the land trust on ownership and maintenance of the public open space. But based on what we heard from the Planning Commission, the length of public trail has increased per their recommendations, swinging both north and south around the lots of the subdivision. Phasing is an interesting requirement of the PD process. The encouragement is there to have as many phases as possible over as long a time frame that is practical, primarily to minimize having to come back to you, the decision makers, to extend a schedule, and thus the reason for 4 phases on this project. The reality is the developer hopes to do this project in 2 phases, and as you proceed with subdivision design, you may find better economies by rearranging these phases, and the process allows that. And regardless of the number of phases, the big earthwork and big utilities will happen with the first mobilization of the project site. So one takeaway here is that there will not be heavy construction equipment driving to and from the site on a daily basis over a 4-year period, ruining roads and increasing safety issues. There will be a single mobilization for the big earthwork and underground utilities. Understandably, there will be expected traffic associated with small utilities and home construction. I noted earlier that the slope analysis would be discussed in greater detail. There are 4 categories of slopes matching up to the current city hillside regulations, which were identified on the Magnus project. And 74 lots were then planned for, sized, and clustered on the flatter areas of the site, which is less than 20% slope. 5 lots were noted as exceeding the 20% slope category to varying degrees, and we suggested mitigation that widened these lots proportionate to their excess in slope. Those lots were discussed in detail by Scott and are shown as crosshatch lots on the exhibit. The request for a condition on these lots led to an unfortunate and lengthy discussion at the first Planning Commission hearing. We now note that the code allows deviations for planned development zones when it can be shown that impacts have been minimized, erosion and runoff were properly addressed, and that reasonable steps have been taken by the developer to mitigate the aesthetic impacts. On this site, we had to go far above the norm to be able to state and prove road grading would work. And so the road has been designed to a preliminary submittal standard by the team civil engineer. We needed to do this to prove that our roads could meet city and fire standards, to ask for and receive permission for alternative road sections that helped minimize the width of terracing on the site and increase the ability for driveways to access the lots on both the uphill and downhill side of the road, and to work with the fire department on providing facilities that made their jobs a little less difficult. In addition, on this site, we had to go far above the norm to state and prove lot grading was feasible for all 74 lots. And so the overall grading of the individual pad sites were designed, likewise, to close to preliminary plan submittal. And this lot grading incorporated the street grading we just showed, which is important. Because there is a hole in the current hillside code where a lot grades are determined on existing contours, and one might be just under the 20% grade on existing contours, but is likely to be over 20% when examining it with the reality of the road cuts and fills. These lots were examined with the proposed grades. Lot 43 at 24.6% grade and Lot 3 at 23.3% grade are the two highest grade lots of the 5 lots we are asking you to approve through the Plan Development Zone allowances. We have given them extra width, we have included their analysis with future road grades, and we have optimized the ability for the city development engineer to basically review a preliminary grading plan, and who is in agreement that all 5 lots of concern do work. Certainly, this project has a number of attributes and provisions that Scott spoke to in his presentation and or is covered in the written materials submitted as part of the file. But the plan in front of you today has improvements that are a direct response to what we heard from the neighbors and the Planning Commission. The issue of vehicle and pedestrian access is a concern on all projects. On this one, we came to understand from the city and county that the existing streets are in good condition. The proposed turn lanes will be needed, and the priority is getting pedestrians across Broadway. The Magnus team facilitated a discussion to identify and ultimately implement the highest priority pedestrian need for the neighborhood. Ongoing discussions with the city, county, CDOT, and the developer will refine the plan. This includes the developer commitment to participate in design and or funding. There is a support of the county with regards to this project being able to help reduce drainage problems identified in a study that they are initiating. There were statements from Planning Commission to provide more public trails. Now there are additional public trails surrounding the entire subdivision. There were comments about continual construction and construction traffic going on for years over multiple phases. We have confirmed the intent and reality for less phases, a smaller construction window, and less construction traffic on streets. There was concerns for grading, specifically the hillside regulations, and so we included for review levels of drawings that are typically way in excess of the requirement of an ODP, but were needed for street code, alternative streets, fire code, and hillside regulations, and this work provides the support for the 5 specific hillside lots of concern. There is an amendment to the traffic study that clears up some previous misinformation and refines the traffic study accordingly. In addition, although there are few missing stop signs, this, along with any need to improve turn radii for construction vehicles, will be addressed as the project builds. Thank you. I should be available for comments.
Hi, I'm Carrie McDowell Schrader. I'm a traffic and transportation engineer and the owner of McDowell Engineering. McDowell Engineering does traffic and transportation engineering for the mountains and western slope of Colorado. And we did work on the Magnus Court Subdivision's traffic study. We scoped the methodology that we're going to use for this traffic study with Mesa County and the City of Grand Junction, as well as CDOT. And in doing that, the staff identified areas of concern, where we should collect counts, what kind of growth rate assumptions we should do, specific traffic estimates that were applicable to our subdivision. And so we add all this together and analyze them, and then we come up with recommendations in the back of our study. Broadway on the north side of our neighborhood is State Highway 340, so therefore CDOT was involved in this process as well. They reviewed and approved our traffic study and access permit application in December of 2019. Based on our conversations with the city and CDOT, we collected traffic data at the locations shown here in the little gray circles. There's five locations. All of the traffic data that we collected is included in the appendix of the traffic study. It has a detailed 15-minute breakdown of the traffic, includes vehicle classifications, number of pedestrians, number of bicycles at the intersection. So that you can find that in the back of the report. When we're looking at traffic counts or reading a traffic study, we speak in vehicles per day or vehicles per hour. So this slide is just a graphic showing what that actually means. So vertical axis is number of vehicle trips, and the horizontal is time. And so if we look at this, if we say we have 30 vehicles per hour, well, there's 30 vehicles in 60 minutes, which means we have one car every 2 minutes. And when we talk about vehicle trips, we basically, a car going in one direction past a certain point is one vehicle trip. So if you're leaving your house and you're going to work, it's one vehicle trip. And when you return home, that's a second vehicle trip. So when you go from your house to your work and back, that's 2 vehicle trips. So then we take the counts and we basically figure out how to factor it forward to our projections. We talked about the count data. Our counts were taken when there was still 5 vacant lots, and there may be still 5 vacant lots in the adjacent neighborhoods. So we added some existing traffic in for those 5 lots. And then we apply a growth factor, which came from the RTPO planning organization, and come up with what we think the traffic is going to be without the development in 20 years. We looked at background traffic and what happens with or without our development, and now we're going to look at what happens with just the development. So the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual is a national database with 3,000 pages of basically just trip generation data. So looking at other subdivisions, other buildings, etc., by land use, and determining averages of what type of trip rates we see for, in our case, single-family homes. So with 74 proposed dwelling units, we can anticipate 700 average weekday trips, and included in that is 56 trips in the morning and 74 trips in the afternoon. The graph in the lower center of the screen is a general concept of how we see traffic during the day. So, say from 1 to 5 in the morning, most people are sleeping. Then as they start their day, say anywhere from 5 to 9 a.m., they're leaving their house or going to work or school. And so we see a morning rush, let's just say at 8 a.m. or so, and then kind of dies off. And then at lunchtime, you might see more people running errands or going out for lunch. And then in the evening, you'll see the highest peak typically, which is people leaving work, maybe running to the grocery store, going to a soccer game, whatever it happens to be, and then traffic dying off at the end of the day. So these peaks, we generally consider a conservative estimate is that 10% of the daily traffic occurs during the evening peak hour. So now we're going to add it all together. We have our site traffic, what happens just with Magnus, proposed development. Then we already know what's happening with the background traffic and projections, both short-term and long-term. And if we add those together, we get our total traffic. And our total traffic is what we're looking at when we're analyzing our operations for recommendations with short-term and long-term. So of note, this project was started 2 years ago. So when we originally did this analysis, we were looking at year 2018. All of our recommendations are still valid, as that would just give us a conservative estimate of what our recommendations would be for this. So it's still valid in 2020, as well as valid projected through year 2040 or a 20-year planning horizon. The Grand Valley Circulation Plan tells us the type or classification of roadway that we have in the area. So the red and green streets on this map are arterial streets. The blue and turquoise color are smaller level collector streets. And then all of the rest of the dark gray or black are local roads. And local roads capacity depends greatly on the type of roadway it is, whether it's rural or urban, the number of access points directly onto the street, sometimes the topography of the street. And so for a typical residential rural street like this, a comfortable and conservative estimate is about 1,000 vehicles per day. And that is an industry standard. It would, using our 10% rule that we talked about, mean about 1,000 vehicles per day is about 100 cars in the evening peak hour, 100 cars an hour. And so we are under Mesa County's threshold for the capacity of these local streets, and they are not going to require improvements to the adjacent local county roadways. So this slide shows anticipated hourly traffic volumes and existing at our site accesses to the larger streets, so neighborhood access to the larger streets. So the first two are Reed Mesa at Broadway. The yellow, draw on this, is the existing traffic that's out here today. This first one is the morning traffic during the peak hour. This second graph here is the existing traffic in the evening peak hour. The gray on these graphs is our project traffic that's anticipated from the proposed development. And so knowing that we have a capacity, sorry, I'm trying to draw a straight line, it doesn't look that straight, of 1,000 vehicles per day or 100 vehicles per hour. The orange gives us the excess capacity that's left in the roadway system. So the first two are Reed Mesa at Broadway, and the second two are South Broadway at Redlands Parkway. So again, existing traffic, proposed development traffic, remaining available capacity. And then to summarize the modeling and analysis that we did on this data, we took our background traffic, put it into a synchro model, which is our traffic modeling software, which uses highway capacity manual methodology, and looked at the level of service of the intersections, the capacity of the roadway, and the queues that we might see back up. And so we did that both for background traffic and total traffic, which was background plus our project traffic. And we're going to talk about the measurements of those level of service on the next slide. So the highway capacity manual defines level of service based on the amount of time that a car or a vehicle may have to wait to make a maneuver they want to do at an intersection. It's level of service A means you don't have to wait very long. Level of service F means you have excessive delay and you're waiting for a while. And there's two different levels of measurement or graphs for these. One is a signalized intersection and one is a stop sign. At a signalized intersection, you know that eventually you're going to get that green light, so you're a little more patient and you can wait longer. At a stop sign, sometimes you don't know if you're ever going to get that gap in traffic, so you may start to take chances sooner. And that's why you can see that a level of service F occurs sooner at a stop sign than it does at a traffic signal. The next two slides are excerpts from our traffic study. This first one is background, what happens without the development, and the next slide is going to be total, so what happens with the development. We have, let me get my marker again, short-term analysis and long-term analysis. So current conditions today, we're seeing level of service A with low levels of delay. The delay is the number of seconds in parentheses. Internal neighborhood existing intersections are all operating at level of service A through year 2040 projections. As we are leaving the site and getting onto those higher classification roadways, say here at Reed Mesa entering Broadway, we can see that we have a level of service C with about 17 seconds of delay. And then let's look at South Broadway and Redlands Parkway. It looks like in year 2040, again, level of service B or C. Sorry, that kind of cut off about 15 seconds right there. And then when we add in the site traffic, same comparison here. So the internal streets are all still anticipated to be operating at a level of service A with very little delay. The intersection of Broadway and Reed Mesa, again, is anticipated to be a level of service C, so it looks like we've added about 1 second of delay in the 20-year forecast. And then a little bit more delay, maybe adding about 3 seconds, or if I remember correctly, of delay at South Broadway and Redlands Parkway with the addition of our site traffic. So we use all of this information to come up with our proposed recommendations to mitigate the project traffic on the surrounding neighborhood streets. And so in this case, we identified the need for 2 turn lanes, a southbound right turn lane on Redlands Parkway and a westbound left turn lane on Broadway into Reed Mesa. We also recommended stop signs internal to the neighborhood. This has the intent of increasing driver awareness and who has the intended stop control at each intersection. We also had recommended stop bars on the streets, but the county wasn't interested in having those painted onto the asphalt. And so we also know there might be grade modification needed on 22 1/4 road due to the hump or the vertical crest curve about 100 feet past the Magnus court access. And so that will be constructed to city standards. We also know that we need to trim some vegetation for sight distance at the accesses to Broadway and Redlands Parkway. And the applicant is willing to work on multimodal improvements with Mesa County, Grand Junction, and CDOT. And the applicant will also improve curb radii at the intersections where we think construction vehicles may be impacted or may cut the corner too tight, and do some improvements there. So that concludes my presentation. I look forward to questions and comments submitted via the city's online communication portal. Thank you.